All right, welcome, Candidate Conversations with Skye. We're here with Ellen. Ellen, short first name, long last name, and she's running for New York State Assembly District 14. So we're going to get to know her a little bit in a candid way and figure out what she brings to the table. So welcome, Ellen.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So tell us in short your background and what's brought you to this moment to run for New York State office.
So in short, I was raised in Nassau County, and I've been living in Oceanside for almost 20 years with my two daughters, teenage daughters, my husband, who is a veteran, and two dogs. And I've been a community organizer, an educator. I was a New York City teacher and an environmentalist, and decided that it was time for a change. And so I was raised by a family that really felt that if you saw things that were wrong and were not what you wanted for the future, that you just roll up your sleeves and you dive in. So that's what I'm doing.
So how's it been going day to day on the campaign trail in and around your district?
I love it. So for the last 10 years, I was writing a free family-friendly website for my community. And so I was always getting out there and going to events and meeting with people. And I had a free calendar for families, trying to create just really fun experiences. It's very reminiscent of that. So I've been getting out, getting into the community, talking to people. They didn't realize how much I missed it from COVID and from being inside. But as I'm doing it, I absolutely love it. I'm a people person. And what I like to say is a connector. I connect people and businesses and people and services. And so this is just my entire life has led up to the culmination of this point in time. This has just been a dream.
It's great because I consider myself that way too, a people person and a connector. And it's tough out there, right? Because a lot of people have felt that they want to give up on government, that government is serving them. But when you're talking about that you're someone that's able to connect the community with services, that is the job of a government official.
I agree. And I believe that a lot of people are getting annoyed about the just what they see. And they are starting to forget that their vote is their voice. And it's a very important. Many of these elections are winning, people win by 100 votes. I mean, small margins. And so you have to get out there and remind people, especially when you get really frustrated. For me, I find the thing that helps is getting out and doing something and being a part of it rather than just sitting back and complaining and feeling helpless. I find there is such a power to getting out and to doing something. And I've been having a great time inviting people to join me. I can't do this alone. I need my whole community to join me and get involved. And I think it's reinvigorating our communities.
So with your background doing activism and community engagement in the environment, I mean, climate change is something that we've been talking about for years, but yet seems to have become a politicized issue instead of a community issue. So what's your thought process around that?
You know what's really crazy is that I don't hear anybody talking about the climate crisis. I mean, here and there, they'll say sustainability or recycling, which, by the way, doesn't work, and they knew that. But nobody's really getting into it and talking about it. In my area, we're on the water. So, even a lot of my friends are like, oh, that's going to happen so far away. And it's not happening so far away anymore. It's happening now. So I think what's most important is to actually talk about it because, I was talking to these two college kids and they said, what do you stand for? I said, oh, the environment. Let me get some. And they said, finally, a candidate that's actually talking about the environment. They sort of just mention it, but nobody actually dives in. So I think especially in my community, we're all, a lot of us are victims of Hurricane Sandy. The once in 100 years is now a lot more often than once in 100 years. And so we really need to, we keep reacting to these storms and we need to start preparing for them. And I think that's what's really important and where I just spent the weekend in the city with Climate Reality and Al Gore. And I had the opportunity to meet him. And I asked him, I said, look, how do you get the messaging across when it's really, really scary but at the same time, you want to give people hope. And he said, that's exactly what you do. You start off and you explain, we have all the tools to mitigate climate change right now. And then you go into the really scary stuff. But if we don't, we're doomed.
Yeah.
So
is there something like off the top of your head, because I know it's a complex topic, but is there something that comes to mind when we think of mitigation and preventive, blah, blah, blah? What can be done at the state level right away? Because when you ask our state leaders, they say, oh, we need funding, we need the federal government to help, we need this, we need that, we need bipartisan support. But like, what can actually be done that's like relatively simple?
Well, the federal money is there. They did the IRA. And so that I did an entire training on that for schools and for local organizations. They get a ton of money back for going solar. So even if you do something as simple as go solar, there's so many rebates. There's so much money coming in. You really can't see that anymore. And look, sometimes we both know, sometimes you have to spend a little money up front to save a ton on the back end. And so even doing something like that where, locally, solar, locally, you can just sort of reduce, it's all about fossil fuels. So you reduce fossil fuels, electric buses, electric cars, just doing that alone is a huge help. But even for individual people, they think, oh, like what's my one person? Well, a huge problem with the fossil fuels is plastics. Stop using single plastics. All you gotta do is go out and buy a reusable water bottle or carry around a fork in your car that you can then wash. Makes a huge difference. Yeah, I had some.
Okay, that's a good one. Okay, Ellen, tell us a lesser known fact about yourself.
So for a while, I worked in television and I worked in what was called standards and practices. And I watched everything and I read all the scripts uncut. And it was my job to take out the sex, the language, and the violence you're not supposed to see. So my friends used to say, I made a really good movie, super clean, but it was a lot of fun.
And has any of that carried over into your work today?
Well, it has, because I actually have a doctoral degree. So my dissertation was about violence and sex in the media and how it affects children. And it was really interesting because people used to just not understand because, first of all, I had a filthy mouth because I had to at work. And so they used to say, well, you don't seem like the kind. They thought it was like glasses, librarian, old school, old looking woman with like no makeup. And here I was really young. And so I had done a ton of research. So it does carry over. My poor children, when they were growing up, I was like, you can't watch that. And they'd say, why? And I say, well, because studies show that you're going to become desensitized. And the more you watch, the Roadrunner get hit, the more you're going to think it's nothing. And so I was a huge party pooper as a mom.
Wow. Wait, so what was your thesis then, this doctoral degree? Like, what was the conclusion?
So it looked at two things. So now we take for granted the TV parental guideline ratings, but when I was writing my dissertation, they were brand new. So I believe I was one of the first ones that looked at parental guideline ratings. And so it was how sex and violence affected children in the media, and then how raters, people like me who had to watch that stuff over and over again, how our ratings differed from what parents would rate. So what would happen is over time, you would get so desensitized that when somebody was decapitated on screen, you'd like, whatever, like they got decapitated, no big deal because you watched it so many times. Well, parents were much more stringent in their ratings, where obviously people like me who watched thousands of hours of TV didn't really care about it anymore. It was like not that big of a deal. So it just shows, and then it carries on. If your child is watching thousands of hours, then it just becomes normalized. Rape on TV can become normalized, and the way men are treating women can become normalized. And so it was a really interesting study. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's interesting because I believe the more and more the media shows these protests that have been happening, all kinds of protests, whether it's a climate protest, Israel-Palestine protest, the more protests we're seeing. Same thing, shootings on the subway. Now all of a sudden it's like super popularized because I think the media keeps showing people that it's okay to have a shooting on the subway.
I agree. And I think also a lot of times when you see it on the TV, you sort of think this is really happening so much. I get into these arguments with friends of mine and they're like, it's happening everywhere. And I was like, no, it was just once. But because you're seeing it over and over and over again, you're starting to think it's not safe to be. I have friends who won't go into Manhattan because they're like, oh my God, it's so not safe. And you know what? There's police everywhere. You're okay. You're starting to become very paranoid because the same thing that you're looking at over and over and over again gets magnified.
Interesting. Wait, so talk to us the last part about social media, right? You said you're used to using social media. You have this degree, you understand media and how important that is when we talk about elections and society, as we are a digital media society.
I think it's really hard because I tried to explain to my daughters who are, 17 and 19, that you get your news from news sources. TikTok videos from a random person doesn't make it fact. So just for the newer generation to understand that, even myself, I'll go on Facebook and I'll click on something and I have to look at the source to remind myself. Sometimes it's just a random blog in somebody's, they're blogging in their basement, which is great, but that's an opinion piece. It doesn't necessarily make it fact. So I think that you really have to go back to the source. And look, I love social media. Many of I had a website before. It was run on social media. I think there's great aspects. We're on social media right now and you can get information, but I think you need to remember to go look at the source and take it from where it comes from. As long as you sort of know what you're getting, you're all good.
Okay. See, I bet these are conversations that you don't typically have with people who are interested in your platform when you're running for the 14th Assembly District, but now we've gotten to know a little bit inside your head and your background.
Well, thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so now you're going to tell us a fun anecdote from growing up that has to do with politics.
So I got interested in politics when I went to GW for college. And my father calls me up one day. My father always said, you should run for office. You should run for office. I say, don't be ridiculous. So he calls me up one day and he says, I'm in my client's office. His daughter is leaving an internship. You want an internship in Congress? It's like, sure, why not? So I went and it was the most amazing experience. So this congressman was my district congressman and he was in office for a very long time and he was married, but his wife was insanely pregnant. So the State of the Union, they only got 2 tickets. This was back then. I don't know if they changed it for themselves to attend the State of the Union and one other person. So his wife was insanely pregnant. She was like, I'm not going. And everyone on his staff, it's like nothing for them. They want to actually leave the building and not be around because it gets too crazy. So he said, you want to go? And I said, of course I want to go. And to this day, every year when I watch it, I always tell my kids or my husband, I'm like, right there in the balcony was where I sat for the State of the Union. And I remember thinking, looking down, because I was like right there, on the balcony looking down, every Supreme Court justice was sitting right below me. And I remember thinking like, this is the most amazing experience. I'll never have this experience ever again, to be in this room.
Wow. Yeah, it's a powerful feeling.
Yeah, it was great.
And that gave you the bug.
It did. I was always interested. Again, never thinking I would be in a position to even run. But even throughout my life, my father just really pushed leadership. He kept saying, when I bought my apartment in Brooklyn, he's like, why aren't you running for the board? Because I'm in my early 30s. Why am I going to do? No, you have to take charge because you can't let things happen to you. Your apartment is the biggest asset investment you have. You're going to let somebody else rule you? You should be a part of it. And yeah, I ran and I was on the board of my apartment building, but it was incredible. He instilled that you can just sit back and be a passenger, or there's this amazing journey called life and you can take the wheel and you can help others.